Well, hello everyone. This is Dr. Losey here as we talk this time about adolescent and adolescence. This information is a summary from Wikipedia entries, which is a good starting point for our work in understanding adolescent development and the teaching of adolescence. So the main point of this part number one is understanding and the development of what are the changes that occur during adolescence. I like this picture on the first slide because you can see the vast difference between the physical development of all 5 of these students who are in adolescence. So as I mentioned, this information is from Wikipedia, and it's a summary of that information, which we will cover in 5 parts, and then go into more specific details from other sources. So in part 1, it's adolescence, puberty, growth spurts. The 4th is reproductive or reproduction changes, and the 5th section of part 1 covers changes in the brain. So in part 1 there are 5 subheadings, or an APA level 1 headings in this article. Number 1, adolescence; 2, puberty; 3, growth spurt; 4, reproduction changes; and 5, brain changes. So we'll look first at overall, what is adolescence? Adolescence is a transition from being a child to being an adult. It generally occurs starting at about age 10 or 11, as we will see. The job of adolescence is to allow this living, breathing human being to move from childhood under the complete care of parents and caretakers and caregivers to being a fully functioning, independent adult. And assume the adult roles. What's interesting is that there are many celebrations that recognize the end of adolescence. And it depends upon the culture and the country. It is, however, pretty common for cultures in different locations in the world to have celebrations that this person who was a child and then was an adolescent is now an adult and able to do things like serve in the military, to fight, to vote, to buy alcohol, to get married. How those celebrations done? Well, again, it depends upon your location and your culture. We often talk about sweet 16 parties and then the 21-year-old parties and what you can do at 21 that you couldn't do at 16, and then 18-year-old birth parties and what you could do at 18 that you couldn't do. I happened to be the first year, I was 18, and the first year that 18-year-olds were allowed to vote. Big times. So now this next section is all about puberty. There are several years of rapid growth that occur during puberty. We have physical growth, for sure, and psychological changes in growth, culminating in sexual maturity. That's one of the biggest end results of passing through puberty and through adolescence, is that the person is then fully functioning in sexual, physical ability and maturity. So the onset of puberty for girls generally is 10 or 11. The onset of puberty for boys, excuse me, I've got that wrong. That was wrong. Yep, no, that's right. Girls are first. Girls reach puberty first, or have the onset of puberty first. Generally 10 or 11, and for boys it's generally 11 or 12. Then it ends for girls generally 15 or 16, and for boys 16 or 17. So we're talking 5, 6, or 7 year period in this transition from being a child to being a functioning adult with sexual maturity. Here is a diagram that again is from Google but is in many different kinds of textbooks, which show the changes in both male and female that occur during puberty, and this diagram, both these diagrams are demonstrating at the end of puberty to culminating in sexual maturity. And again, this would be the conclusion of puberty. So moving to section 3, the growth spurt. Well, if the time of adolescence is generally 5, 6, or 7 years, there's a whole lot of growing that's got to take place in that time period. The growth spurt is driven by growth hormones that suddenly become much more active and much more prevalent, thyroid hormones, same thing, and androgenous, which is the sexual hormones. So you can see here that for males, the growth spurt generally occurs typically 2 years after females. So if when you're out doing field experience in the middle schools, or if you are teaching in the middle schools, you're going to notice that physically the girls in middle school are often have grown much more than the boys, and will be taller, will weigh a little more, and the boys are wondering what in the heck happened. Generally, we can assume that for males, in the growth spurt, they're going to gain about 4 inches per year in height. And for females, it's about 3.5 inches of height per year. Now, the girls are starting earlier than the boys, but the boys are actually gaining a little bit more height than girls in each of the years. Other things that are developing besides height is muscle development, more fat on the body, bones are becoming, the growth plates are closing, they're becoming more solid, and diet is changing. And one of the interesting things I found in this summary from Wikipedia was that as girls are in puberty, their diet often decreases, while boys' appetite generally increases. Now, it's not the same 100%. You can't say that 100%, but it was noted that there are generally girls are reducing their appetite, and there's some thinking on why that might be, as far as their bodies becoming capable of growing a child. Down in the green at the bottom, you can see that in the male's heart is becoming larger than it was, much more efficient at pumping blood through the body, physical strength, and many more red blood cells are present. So we got this large growth spurt going on. Now the fourth section is reproduction-related changes. We kind of looked at that from the diagram before, but we'll take another look now. Remember, this whole section is about what is going on in the transition from being a child to being an adult. And we know that there are changes in brain and in physical attributes, there will be emotions, and right now we're looking at reproductive-related changes. So the changes going on here would be directly related to the sex organs. For males, the testes, the scrotum, and the penis are becoming larger and capable of producing semen through an ejaculation, and actually becoming able to father children. For females, the growth is in the uterus, the vagina, and other reproductive systems, fallopian tubes, and so forth. Another, I guess, interesting inclusion in this summary is that while males can actually produce offspring through the creation of semen at a very early in puberty, females are generally not fertile until several years after the first period. Now again, that's not for everybody. There's always the outliers, the exceptions to the typical. But typically, females were not capable or are not of producing children, of having a child, of becoming pregnant, of being fertile until several years after the first onset of the period. So this was section 4, and we just have one section left, so let's take a look. This is section 5, changes in the brain. A nice picture of a brain here. The frontal lobe, the prefrontal cortex, the temporal lobe, the parietal lobe, the occipital lobe. Lots of changes going on in adolescence, just as it's being changed throughout the body. So, the brain is not fully developed when a boy or a girl, or a young woman or a young man reaches puberty. In fact, it's not fully developed at the end of puberty. There is a large growth period of the brain for several years. So important changes occur from when a person is 10 years old through up into 25 years old. So we can see that this transition period of brain growth is a 15-year period generally, again typically 15 years, while puberty itself may only be 5, 6, or 7 years long. So we got brain growth going on longer than puberty. 18 years old, a legal adult, your brain is not fully developed. 21 years old, going to go out on your 21st birthday, everyone talks about, well, I can buy alcohol now. Not a fully developed brain. And there's a lot of study going on about what is happening to a person's brain during these years. But it's interesting to know that even if you are teaching seniors in a high school, the secondary education students, candidates, you will be teaching students whose brain is not fully developed. So whether they're in the 5th grade of middle school or 12th grade of high school, their brain is developing throughout this period and after high school and into college. Decision making, that's the big area, because I'm chuckling because I can look back at what I think are ridiculous decisions that I made in puberty, and I've already told you about dumping the gallon of ketchup on my girlfriend at the restaurant, who now is my wife. And there are other more silly decisions than that. So decision making during this brain development is suspect from time to time. Why? Because there is a hormone called glutamate, which is an excitatory hormone, actually brain transmitter, chemical in the brain. In other words, it's there present between the neurons and the synapse, and the charges are going through and it's carrying those. And it's revving the person up. I'm excited. Let's go do this. You want to jump off the trestle at Corydon? Sure, let's go do that. How deep's the water? I don't know. Do we really need to check? Probably not. Let's just jump. And then the other neurotransmitter is dopamine, which associates with pleasure, feeling good, feeling contentment, and those are pretty much, shall we say, running rampant in adolescence and even into late adolescence and early adulthood. So those two brain neurotransmitters. Being excited, finding some pleasure, let's go do a lot of stuff that probably you're not going to want to do later on in life. So this is kind of a exclamation point time. And I'm chuckling, and I probably shouldn't be, because there are students who do, young people who do hurt themselves. And let's hope that they don't. Okay, so we've had the 5 sections. That's really all, folks. That's the end of part 1. Please be reading part 2 that I sent to you on email. And I'm also going to send to you 2 or 3 short YouTube videos that correspond to this part 1, the exact things that we've talked about here, that will be a follow-up to what I've said. So please watch those as we continue our study of adolescence and adolescence in the learning community. All right, good to talk to you. Take care. That's all, folks.